Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before I begin, can everybody hear me clearly? Okay, Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Nabi al-Kareem. Want to welcome you all to this webinar on the lessons from the life of Umar II, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. And to all of those who are watching the recording of this later on YouTube, welcome as well. I'm really excited to share with you my thoughts on this topic. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, is one of my role models whose life I have been studying from the time I was a child. Honestly, I've been studying the life of Umar bin Abdul Aziz from a very young age. He is one of my role models growing up, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the lessons I've learned from his life. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through his life and we're going to extract lessons from it. And before we do any of that, just an introduction to myself. As this is a audio and PowerPoint presentation, you're not going to see my face. Some of you may be hearing my voice for the first time. You might not be familiar with who I am and the work that I do. So just very briefly, that's me, right? My name is Ismail Kamda. I am a graduate in Islamic Studies, having completed both the Alim program and a bachelor's in Islamic Studies. And I am the founder of Islamic Self Help, who is the host of this webinar. I founded Islamic Self Help about 5.5 years ago with the purpose of helping people to develop and improve themselves through an Islamic framework. And this webinar is an example of that. In this webinar, we will be looking at a Islamic role model and extracting self-help lessons from his life. So it's an excellent example of what I mean by Islamic self-help. Alhamdulillah, over the past decade, I have written over a dozen books, and we'll get to that a bit later about my latest book, inshallah. I'm also the faculty manager of the International Open University, IOU, where I have been serving for a decade as well. I've spent 10 years serving that university. So alhamdulillah, I have over a decade of experience in the field of education, most of it online. So webinars, this is right up my alley. This is where I enjoy being. This is the kind of work I enjoy doing. And I really hope you are going to enjoy and benefit from today's webinar. So what can you expect from today? Before we actually get into it, what are the objectives of this webinar? What can you hope to take away from this? Number one, I hope that you will appreciate the role that Umar II played in Muslim history. One of the reasons why I chose Umar II as the uh, person that we will be studying today is because even though he is one of my favorite role models in Islamic history, a lot of people who I meet have never even heard about him. So I'm hoping that this webinar changes that and that people realize what an important role this man played in the history of Islam. Number two, from looking at the life of Umar II, I hope that we can learn some crucial leadership skills because this man was a great ruler, and there's really important leadership lessons we can learn from the way he ruled the Muslim world. Number three, that we uncover powerful productivity principles from his life. The amount of things that Umar II was able to accomplish in his short life, because he passed away at the age of 37, an incredibly short life. I mean, I'm 33 years old at the moment. That's just 5 years longer than I've lived thus far. I can't even imagine, that short a life and being able to accomplish that much. But we're going to get into that. What did he do that helped him to accomplish so much in such a short time? And through all of this, I hope that at the end of the day, when this is over, we will take Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, as a role model and implement the lessons that we have learned into our lives. So let's get started with today's presentation. Let's begin with the most basic part. Who is Umar II? Right? Umar II, full name Umar bin Abdul Aziz bin Marwan bin Hakam. Umar, the son of Abdul Aziz, the son of Marwan, the son of Hakam. So Umar bin Abdul Aziz comes from a noble lineage. on both sides of his family. On his father's side, he is the grandson of the Umayyad Caliph Marwan ibn Hakam. Now, for those of you who don't know this, Marwan ibn Hakam was the second Umayyad family to rule. The first Umayyad family to rule was Muawiyah, his son Yazid, and his son Muawiyah. Then it shifted to Muawiyah's cousin Marwan, right? After Marwan, his son Abdul Malik ruled. Abdul Malik had a brother named Abdul Aziz. Umar is Abdul Aziz's son. Abdul Aziz never had a chance to become Khalif. He passed away during his brother's reign. After that, the Khilafat passed to the sons of Abdul Malik, right? So Walid and then Suleiman, and then it passed to Umar before going back to the sons of Marwan. So he comes from a very noble lineage on his father's side, in that he is from the family of kings, the family of Khalifs. On his mother's side, he has an even more noble lineage, because he is the great grandson of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. So there is a very beautiful story that Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, when he was doing his night tours, he would go around at night to see if anybody needs help, and he overheard a conversation where a woman was trying to get her daughter to cheat in their business, right? I'm not going to go into details about that, but essentially she was telling her to do something that Umar had prohibited, and the daughter was saying Umar had prohibited us from doing that, and the mother said Umar can't see you, and the daughter said but Allah can see us. So Umar radiallahu anhu was so impressed by this young girl's taqwa that the next day he found out who she was and proposed to her on behalf of his son. He got his son married to her, and so Umar's son married this righteous woman, and then Umar radiallahu anhu had a dream that from their descendants there came a righteous and just ruler. So this was a vision that Umar radiallahu anhu was granted in his dream, that from the descendants of this couple would be a righteous ruler. So this couple had a daughter, and their daughter married Abdul Aziz, and they had a son named Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who became a righteous and just ruler, making true the dream of Umar ibn al-Khattab. So you can see Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is a very special person. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Umar ibn al-Khattab with a dream about him almost a century before his life really shows what an important individual he is. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was the 8th Umayyad Caliph, making him the 13th person in history to hold the position of Caliph of the Muslim Ummah, right? He was the 8th of the Umayyad dynasty. And even before being Caliph, he was the governor of Medina during the reign of Walid and the vizier of Suleiman when Suleiman was the Caliph. So he had a history of politics, right? He had experience before becoming Khalifa, first as a governor and then as a vizier before becoming the Khalifa. What's extraordinary about the life of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is that he was the Khalifa of the Muslim world for only 2.5 years, like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Yet in these 2.5 years, he accomplished more than many people do in a lifetime. And that's really the barakah of being a righteous ruler. So let's get into the reign of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz became the Khalifa in the year 99 AH, 99 after Hijrah, when his cousin Suleiman was passing away. So Suleiman was the Caliph at that time. He was the second son of Abdul Malik to be ruling, and he had a bad habit of overeating, of indulging in food, which led to complications in his health, which led to him dying very, very young. Before dying, he was worried about two things. Number one, who's going to take over the Khilafat after him? And number two, what's he going to do about the sins that he committed during his lifetime? Because he was a very extravagant ruler. He didn't really focus on the needs of his people. He focused more on indulging in gluttony. So one of his wazirs gave him advice, and the advice was to make his cousin / brother-in-law Umar the next Khalifa. So this, again, a bit of history. Umar bin Abdul Aziz is the cousin of Suleiman, as you should have figured out by now. Suleiman, the son of Abdul Malik, Umar, the son of Abdul Aziz. But not only were they cousins, Umar was also married to Suleiman's sister, Fatima bint Abdul Malik, a very righteous and famous woman in our history. Now, those of you from Western cultures may be but shocked that Umar married his first cousin. That was normal at that time, especially in royal families, and it's something that's permissible in the Sharia. So it's really not something that you should worry too much about. Nonetheless, he is the brother-in-law and the cousin and the advisor of Suleiman. Suleiman knows him to be a righteous man. He knows him to be a just individual, as he saw when he was the governor. And Suleiman's own children are too young to take over. So he makes it his will that his cousin Umar becomes the next Khalifa. So when Suleiman passes away, Umar bin Abdul Aziz becomes the Khalifa. And this leads to a radical shift in how the Muslim world was ruled. So again, a bit of history before this. In the time of the Khulafa Rashidin, the Ummah was ruled from a position of righteousness. When the shift was made towards the Umayyads, especially the later Umayyads, Abdul Malik and his sons, it kind of became more of a materialistic reign, where the Khalifa is more focused on collecting taxes and living like a king and showing off, and is less focused on religion. Umar bin Abdul Aziz, he grew up in Medina. He was raised by some of the Sahaba, so his grandfather's brother Abdullah ibn Umar helped raise him and teach him. He grew up in a very different environment from his cousins, and so he grew into a righteous individual. And he made it his goal to revive the methodology of the early Khalifas. So in his reign, things went back to the way they were in the time of the rightly guided Khilafat. And this actually, many of the Hadith scholars list this as a fulfillment of a prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he stated, at the end of every century, Allah will send a reviver of the religion. And so exactly at the end of the first century, from 99 to 101 AH, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz ruled as Ummah. And he is, according to the majority of Hadith scholars and historians, the reviver, the first reviver in the history of Islam. Right? So what did he do? What were these changes that he made? Well, in many areas of governance, particularly finance and expansion, he made major changes. So he cut down on some of the taxes. He invested more money into education, into Islamic scholarship, into the development of lands. He stopped the military expansion of the Ummah, so he could focus on the development of the lands that were already under their control. This was something that wasn't done before him. Military expansion has always been part of the history of the Muslim nations, with very few exceptions, usually the exceptions being during a period of civil war. Umar bin Abdul Aziz's reign was the first time that expansion was halted, not because of civil war, but because the Khalifa felt he needed to pay attention to the lands they were already ruling and develop those lands first. So it was a very unique decision that he made at that point in history. One of the things he did differently was, unlike his cousins, once he became the Khalifa, he gave up all of his luxuries. And this is a man who grew up in luxury as a prince. He gave it all up, lived a simple life for the rest of his life. And he wanted to live like how Abu Bakr and Umar lived, a very simple life. What happened was, again, this happens so many times in history. When someone comes in and makes radical changes for the better, others can't handle it. So Umar's cousins couldn't handle the changes. One of them paid off his slave to poison one of his meals, and so Umar died of food poisoning, and the Khilafat shifted back to his cousin Yazid II, and things went back to the way they were before the reign of Umar. So this is historically, if you look at the 1,400 year history of Islam, the reign of Umar bin Abdul Aziz seems like a footnote. It's just 2.5 years, and he came in to make some changes, and then he was killed off, and things went back to the way they were before him. So some of you may ask, what's the point? Some of you may ask, why study his life? Why, what's the point of this? Well, the point is that when you look at the life of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, there are many, many lessons that we can extract from the life of this great man. And that's what I want to get into now. The legacy of Umar II. This man did amazing things, truly amazing things. Let's look at some of the stuff he did during his reign, starting with the compilation of hadith. So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the great grandfather of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, was the one who came up with the idea of compiling the Quran into one book so that it does not get lost. And that was carried out during his lifetime, during the reign of Abu Bakr. His great grandson had a similar idea about hadith. So 99 AH, it's been about 80 years since the Prophet ﷺ passed away. Hadith is primarily being taught orally by word of mouth. It's still the second generation of Islam. Umar bin Abdul Aziz is a second generation Muslim at-Tabi'in. He gathered some of the leading hadith scholars of his time and asked them to collect the administrative hadiths into written form. And he begins this idea of writing hadiths into manuscripts, into books. And so this idea begins in his life and it continues after his death. And about 200 years later, it reaches its peak with the writing of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. But the beginning of this trend of compiling hadith into book form so that it is not lost begins in the reign of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. And so it is our hope that the reward of this, whoever did it after his time right until today, will go back to him. A second major change he made was increasing the salaries of the ulama, the scholars of Islam. So in the reign of Walid I, Umar's cousin, Walid introduced the idea that the government would pay the ulama salaries to teach Islam so that they don't have to worry about earning a living. This is such an amazing decision that really led to years of Islamic scholarship, golden ages of Islamic scholarship. People didn't have to worry about money. It's not like today where if you're doing Islamic work every day you worried whether you're going to be able to pay your bills and things like that. This was a major decision, and Umar made it even easier when he became the Khalifa. He increased the salaries of scholars, he increased the significance of scholars, and he gave them a bigger role to play in society. Right? So the ulama were now spread out. He sent them to different parts of the world, of the Muslim world, paying them higher salaries and telling them to teach the people of those lands and do da'wah to the people of those lands. Another important part of his legacy was that he removed various unjust taxes that his cousins had introduced. When the governors argued about this, a very beautiful quotation from Umar bin Abdul Aziz. When his governors argued against this, he argued back saying, Allah did not send the Prophet ﷺ as a tax collector. He sent him as a mercy to the universe. And so this really shows the mindset of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. He removed these unjust taxes, which actually led to thousands of people converting to Islam. Right? Some of these taxes were actually barriers in the way of people converting to Islam. It's really amazing. The development of Spain began during his reign. Now, Spain was actually conquered during the reign of his cousin Walid, but during the reign of Walid and Suleiman, Spain was kind of neglected. Right? It was very far away. It was in Europe. They were in Damascus. They didn't really pay much attention to this land. They didn't realize its potential, and so it just kind of was there as part of the Ummah. Umar bin Abdul Aziz seems to be the first Khalif to actually realize the potential of Spain. And so he sends a righteous man to rule it, to become the governor of it, and he does a census of Spain. So he actually has data collected on how many cities are there, how many provinces, the people, the languages, the geography, the mountains, the rivers. A full thorough research is done during his reign so that people could analyze what is this land and what is its potential and what can we do with it. And so again, this will blossom 100 years later when the Umayyads become the sole rulers of Spain and focus all the energy on Spain. The golden age of Spain begins. But really the beginnings of this, the seeds of this can be seen in the reign of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. As mentioned earlier, thousands of people converted to Islam during his reign. The Dhimmis, many of them people living in the Muslim land who were paying a jizya to live in a Muslim land. During his reign, thousands of them converted to Islam for two or three different reasons. The first one being the removal of the unjust taxes. The second one being that Umar sent ulama to these newly conquered lands to teach the people Islam. Again, he did not neglect the people. He made sure that the message of Islam reached the masses. And this had a profound effect on these lands. Many lands today where the majority of people are Muslim, that shift may have happened during the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. Another amazing thing about his reign, by removing the unjust taxes, by paying attention to the zakah being distributed properly, the waqf being introduced properly, by increasing the salaries of ulama, by making life easier for his people, he managed to balance the economy, and in many parts of his empire, there was no poverty. Poverty had come to an end, including many parts of Africa. That there was no poverty during his reign in many parts of his empire. And this is a man who's ruling a huge empire across 3 continents. Like the Umayyad Empire at that time, part of it was in Asia, the Middle East, part of it was in North Africa, and part of it was in Europe, Spain. He's ruling a huge empire, and many parts of it, poverty came to an end during his reign because of the policies he had implemented. So you can see this is an amazing individual in our history, someone whose life is truly worth studying and emulating. So it's always been my methodology not just to read history but to reflect on it and extract lessons from it. And over the years, I've studied the life of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz many times and extracted many lessons from his life. And I want to share with you some of them today. The first one, the one that always hits me when I read his life story, is you don't need a long life to make a difference. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz passed away at the age of 37. He was the Khalifa for 2.5 years. Yet the impact he left on this ummah is profound. It is truly amazing. It is mind-boggling. And really, this teaches us it doesn't matter how long you live in this world. What matters is what you do with the time that is given to you. Another beautiful lesson we take from the life of Umar bin Abdul Aziz is that when you live a life that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts barakah in your life and efforts. He blesses it. So Umar bin Abdul Aziz started many projects in his life that people continue to benefit from today, 1,300 years later. The clearest example being, the compilation of hadith. It started in his reign, and right till today it's something that Muslims in every part of the world benefit from. And that takes us to lesson number 3. Sometimes you start something and it only really produces results long after you've passed away. And so, many of us, we want our projects to succeed during our lifetimes. It's not always possible. A Muslim isn't focused on this life. A Muslim is focused on the akhirah. And so many of our projects should be projects for thawab jariyah, for reward that will continue after we die. Things that will continue to benefit the ummah long after we have left this world. Many of the things that Umar bin Abdul Aziz did fall into this category. Umar bin Abdul Aziz was the kind of person whose focus was always on the akhirah. You see this from the statements that he made. You see this from how he lived his life, from the khutbah he gave when he became Khalif, to his parting advice to his children. All of it's focused on the akhirah. Another important lesson we learned from the life of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, and I apologize for getting but emotional here. Whenever I talk about this great man, I can't help but feel in awe. May Allah accept his deeds and help us to follow in his footsteps. Ameen. Just give me a second, pull myself together. Okay, so Umar bin Abdul Aziz, another beautiful lesson we take from his life is that he focused on benefiting the ummah, not on his own self. He focused on others, even those who were not Muslim. He didn't really differentiate here. He didn't want to put unjust taxes even upon his non-Muslim, people living in his empire. He wanted to make sure education reached everybody, eliminated poverty as much as possible. He didn't seem to care about himself. Right? He completely stripped his life of all the things we are chasing after today, just so that the rest of the ummah can benefit. This unselfishness, this focus on benefiting the ummah, it's missing in our lives today. And really, this is where barakah comes from. This is where real success comes from. This is where real legacy comes from. You can learn from his life that even a brief life of righteousness can leave a lasting legacy. Someone can live in this world for a very short time And if they live that life properly, the benefits of that can last forever. I think about my own father. My father, rahimahullah, was murdered when he was 29 years old. Now, I'm 33, I can't imagine that. I was 8 years old when he passed away. But I always meet people who have nothing but good to say about him and always tell me stories of how he helped them and how he benefited them. And I can't help but think that my father only lived in this world for 29 years, but he left such an amazing legacy. And we see the same with Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, 37. That's all the time he spent in this dunya. But look at what he left behind. Look at this amazing, amazing legacy of his. The final lesson is we should try. Trying to make a difference matters more than you think, even if you don't succeed in this world. I mean, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz didn't succeed at everything he tried. He tried to shift the Khilafat back to the methodology of the Khulafa Rashidin. That only lasted 2 years. But Allah will still reward him for that. We still make dua for him because of that. We still think about him because of that. We still study his life because of that. He still earns reward because of that, inshallah. I mean, sometimes you don't succeed in this world, but your reward in the akhirah is great. So, it doesn't matter. Just focus on doing the right thing. Just focus on doing that good work. Whether you succeed in terms of dunya or not, that's immaterial to the real success, which is the akhirah. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz tried many things. Some of them were successful in this world, some of them were not. But inshallah, he will be rewarded for all of them in the akhirah. So how did he accomplish so much? How was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah able to do so much during his lifetime? I spent a lot of time reflecting on this, and I came up with, well, actually 15 reasons why. And I won't get into that right now because I've actually written a book on that topic. We'll cover that next. But I want to discuss at least 5 or 6 of them with you right now. Number 1 is his taqwa. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, his wife Fatima bint Abdul Malik, says about him, she says that Umar, he did not pray more than the average person or fast more than the average person, but I never met a man with more taqwa than him. And when I first read this statement over a decade ago, I was blown away. Because I always associated taqwa and righteousness with somebody who prays extra, who fasts extra. So what did Fatima radiallahu anha or Binti Abdul Malik, what did she mean when she said that her husband had more taqwa than anybody else that she met, even though he never prayed extra salahs or fasted extra compared to the average Muslim of that time? What she meant by this was his justice. This was a man who feared Allah in how he ruled his empire. This was a man who feared Allah in how he spent his money. This was a man who feared Allah in how he spent his time. And so taqwa is the number one reason that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz accomplished so much. He lived a life which was pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that, he lived a life of barakah. And the barakah of his deeds continues to impact us right until today. Just to give you a glimpse of, how the early Muslims viewed Umar bin Abdul Aziz. I was going through the book Hilyatul Awliya, the lives of the awliya, for information about him. And for each of the awliya in that book, there's like 2 or 3 pages. Some of them maybe 10 pages. When I came to the section on Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, I'm not lying to you, the book has 100 pages about him. 100 pages. Because this man was such a righteous individual. It just gives you a glimpse, into the kind of taqwa this man had. And the fact that his own wife testified, because we all know the biggest testimony to whether we are hypocrites or real muttaqis is our own spouses. They know us best. And his wife said, I haven't met a man with more taqwa than him. Number 2 is shura. So Umar bin Abdul Aziz, one of the things he revived from the Muslims before him, from the methodology of Umar ibn al-Khattab and Abu Bakr, was the concept of shura. This is to consult men of wisdom and learning before making a decision. He revived this first when he was the governor of Medina. So he chose the greatest ulama of Medina to be his shura council. And then when he became the Khalifa in Damascus, he did this again. And so all of his decisions were decisions based on shura. They were not decisions just made out of his own nafs or his own whim or his own ideas. He consulted people. He took from the wisdom and experience of other people and knowledge of other people, and he took all of that into consideration before making his decision. And there's actually several quotations from him on the topic of shura, where he basically says that someone who doesn't make shura should not be given a position of authority because they're going to make mistakes. So this is clearly one of those things that helped him to become a person of wise decisions that benefited the ummah. Number 3 was his focus on the akhirah, the afterlife. ʿUmar bin al-ʿAzīz did not chase after material success. His focus was not this world. His focus was not on, becoming famous or becoming wealthy. He could have. Technically he was both. Technically he was both, even though he chose not to live off that wealth. His focus was on pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how you're going to answer to Allah on the Day of Judgment. This drove all of his decisions. Every project he started, every reformation he made of government, all of this was based on his focus on the akhirah. Moving on to some of the more worldly reasons why he succeeded. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah was a master of delegation. Not only would he delegate tasks to people so more got done in less time, but he would delegate tasks to the right people. So when he came up with the idea of compiling hadith, he called the greatest hadith scholars of his time and he shared this idea with them and he gave this task to them. When he wanted to spread Islam to the distant lands, he called some of the greatest ulama of Damascus. He paid them high salaries. He gave them this task and he sent them to distant lands in North Africa and Europe and India and all these other parts of the world to do da'wah and to teach Islam. When he delegated a task to someone, he made sure they were the best person for that task. So it was done in the best possible way and it accomplished the best possible results. And this is a lesson we can take from him for our own work lives, right? To get more done, you have to delegate. You have to pass tasks along to other people. So if it's something simple, you can pass it along to anyone who's competent at it. But if it's something complex, choose someone who's an expert in that area and pass it along to them as he did. And finally, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was a person who never stopped seeking beneficial knowledge. Throughout his life, right till the very end, he's receiving letters from Hassan al-Basri, receiving advice from Hassan al-Basri and other great ulama of his time, listening to the advice, benefiting from the advice, changing opinions based on their advice. This is a man who never stopped learning. And really, any success, whether worldly or afterworldly or both, any success in this life or the next is dependent on knowledge, continuously seeking knowledge. So these are 5 of the 15 principles that I discuss in my book, where I go into even more details about his life. And that's really what I want to share with you a bit about right now. Alhamdulillah, Umar bin Abdul Aziz has been a role model of mine my entire life. And this past year in 2019, I finally got down to writing a book about his life called The Productivity Principles of Umar II. This webinar is actually extracted or based on this book. The book's 300 pages long. It covers his entire life and then 15 productivity principles from his life and details on how to take those principles and apply them to your own life. So this is a very, very beneficial book. I spent the entire writing it. I really, really love this topic. It combines 2 of my favorite topics, the life of one of my heroes with the concept of productivity. And really what you're going to find in this book is lessons that are life-changing. If you take any one of these 15 productivity lessons and apply to your own life, you will end up living a more productive life, guaranteed. You do that to all 15, then mashallah, you are now following in the footsteps of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. So if you want to learn more about this book, the link will be listed below. And for those of you watching on YouTube, it will be listed in the description as well as in the comment section. The link over there is to purchase the PDF edition. If you want it's also available on Kindle and paperback. To get those editions, simply go to your local Amazon website, type in the name of the book or type in my name, and it'll pop up and you can purchase it there. The PDF version, I would prefer if you purchase that, simply because I believe PDF is better. You own it outright. You have it on any of your devices to read. It's also better for the environment. You don't have to print on paper. It's better for the environment. Nonetheless, whichever of those three formats you enjoy most, get the book in that specific edition. So I really hope you're going to benefit from this book, and I hope you benefited from this webinar. And before we close off, there are 2 questions. So at this point, if you want, you can click on the link and go purchase the book and keep reading, or if you want, you can stay for the Q&A and get your copy of the book after the Q&A. It's your choice from this point. Question number 1: why is his name spelled Umar II? Okay, that's not II. That's the Roman numeral 2. In Roman numbers, that's 2. In names of political leaders, that's used to indicate the second. So it's Umar the second, because he was the second Umar to rule this ummah, the first being Umar ibn al-Khattab. So historically, this is how rulers were named. So we have Muawiyah the first and Muawiyah the second, Umar the first and Umar the second. Meaning, if there are multiple rulers in history with the same name, then the way to differentiate between them is to put these numbers first, second, third, etc. Right? So Umar ibn al-ʿAzīz is historically known as Umar the second, because he was the second Umar to rule this ummah. Right? Okay. That's the first question. The second question is, why is the PDF $23? Because it's worth a lot more than that. Really, I guarantee you, these 15 productivity principles are worth a lot more than $23. This is a very, very small investment for the amount of benefit you're going to get from this book. I mean, just look at this webinar alone. The amount of benefit we got from this webinar alone. It is worth far more than that. I 100% guarantee you these $23 are well spent, because you are investing in learning the history of this ummah, learning about the great role model, learning 15 productivity principles. If one of those principles alone is worth $23, all 15 together much more than that. I guarantee you this book is worth your money, it's worth your time. It's something that you're going to benefit from. It's something I benefit from. I mean, I wrote the book, but I still read it because I benefit from it. I love Umar ibn al-ʿAzīz, rahimahullah. He's one of my role models. And really, writing the book was writing down my thoughts about him so that I could go back and reflect upon it later. So I actually read the book myself very often. If I want to go back and reread about Shura, or reread about delegation, or reread about focusing on the Akhirah, I open to those chapters in this book and I read it as a reminder to myself. So this is a book you're going to use many, many times in your life. And really, I believe that this is one of my favorite books that I've ever written. I know you're going to love it. I know you're going to benefit from it. It's worth the money. And it's something that is going to help you to follow in the footsteps of this great man. So with that, we come to the end of this webinar. Thank you to each and every one of you who sat with us. And I hope each and every one of you enjoyed and benefited. Inshallah, we will have many more webinars in the future on other self-help topics. With that, we end. We ask Allah to accept this from us, to add it to our scale of good deeds, to put barakah in whatever we are doing. And we ask Allah to grant Umar ibn al-Āzīz the highest stages of Jannah, and to make all of our lives, a source of sawab jariyah for him, because we take him as a role model and we learned lessons from him, and many of the things we do are because of the great work he did for this ummah. And we ask Allah to help us to live lives of productivity, which are beneficial for this ummah and beneficial for us on the Day of Judgment, and which count for us on the scales on the last day. Don't forget, click on the link below to get your copy of the book. And when you're done with the book, please leave a review, or at least leave a star rating, because that will help others as well to know that the book's worth reading. Thank you so much for your time. May Allah accept this from us. Jazakallah khairan wa akhir da'wana. And alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.